Hi, everybody. Live from young Tommy's bedroom. I'm going to read chapter 10. So I hope that you guys are feeling well and everything's good. This is a really, really interesting chapter. The hands of all the 4,000 electric clocks in all the Bloomsbury Center's 4,000 rooms marked 27 minutes past 2. So it's 2:27 p.m. This hive of industry, as the director was fond of calling it, was in the full buzz of work. Everyone was busy, everything in ordered motion. Under the microscopes, their long tails ferociously lashing, spermatozoa were burrowing head first into eggs and, fertilized, the eggs were expanding, dividing, or if volcanoxified, budding and breaking up into whole populations of separate embryos. For the From the social predestination room, the escalators went rumbling down into the basement, and there, in the crimson darkness, stewing warm on their cushion of petroleum and gorged with blood surrogate and hormones, the fortices grew and grew, or, poisoned, languished into a stunted epsilonhood. With a faint hum and rattle, the moving racks crawled imperceptibly through the weeks and the recapitulated aeons to where, in the decanting room, the newly unbottled babes uttered their first yell of horror and amazement. The dynamos purred in the sub-basement, the lifts rushed up and down. On the 11 floors of nurseries it was feeding time. From 1,800 bottles, 1,800 carefully labeled infants were simultaneously sucking down their pint of pasteurized external secretion. Above them, in 10 successive layers of dormitory, the little boys and girls, who were still young enough to need an afternoon sleep, were as busy as everyone else, though they did not know it, listening unconsciously to hypnopedic lessons in hygiene and sociability, in class consciousness, and in the toddler's love life. Above these again were the playrooms where, the weather have turned to rain, 900 other children were amusing themselves with bricks and clay, modeling, playing hunt the zipper, or erotic play. Disgusting. Buzz, buzz, the hive was humming, busily, joyfully. Blithe was the singing of the young girls over their test tubes, the predestinators whistled as they worked, and in the decanting rooms what glorious jokes were cracked above the empty bottles. But the director's face as he entered the fertilizing room with Henry Foster was grave, wooden with severity. So before we get any further, first couple of paragraphs is everything is working the way it's supposed to be. And kids are drinking what they're supposed to, people are working what they're supposed to, people are happy where they are. And the most important is it is 2:27 p.m. A public example, he was saying, in this room because it contains more high caste workers than any other in the center. I have told him to meet me here at 2:30. 2:30. He does his work very well, put in Henry, with hypocritical generosity. I know, but that's all the more reason for severity. His intellectual eminence carries with it a corresponding moral responsibilities. The greater a man's talents, the greater his power to lead astray. It is better that one should suffer than that many should be corrupted. Consider the matter dispassionately, Mr. Foster, and you will see that no offense is so heinous as unorthodoxy of behavior. Murder kills only the individual, and, after all, what's an individual? With a sweeping gesture he indicated the rows of microscopes and test tubes and incubators. We can make a new one with the greatest of ease, as many as we like. Unorthodoxy threatens more than the life of the mere individual. It strikes at society itself. Yes, at society itself, he repeated. Ah, but here he comes. Bernard entered the room and was advancing between the rows of fertilizers toward them. A veneer of jaunty self-confidence thinly concealed his nervousness. The voice in which he said, "Good morning, Director," was absurdly too loud. That in which, correcting his mistake, he said, "You asked me to come and speak to you here?" Ridiculously soft, a squeak. "Yes, Mr. Marks," said the director, portentously. "I did ask you to come to me here. You returned from your holiday last night, I understand." "Yes," Bernard answered. "Yes," repeated the director, lingering, a serpent, on the S, and then suddenly raising his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he trumpeted. "Ladies and gentlemen." The singing of the girls over their test tubes, the preoccupied whistling of the microscopists, suddenly ceased. There was a profound silence. Everyone looked around. "Ladies and gentlemen." Just checking the time. The director repeated once more. "Excuse me for thus interrupting your labors. A painful duty constrains me. The security and stability of society are in danger. Yes, in danger, ladies and gentlemen. This man," he pointed accusingly at Bernard, "will say, this man who stands before you, this Alpha Plus to whom so much has been given, and from whom, in consequence, so much to be expected, this colleague of yours, or should I anticipate to say this ex-colleague, has grossly betrayed the trust imposed in him by his heretical views on sport and soma, by the scandalous unorthodoxy of his sex life, by his refusal to obey the teachings of our Ford and behave outside of office hours, even as a little infant." Here the director made the sign of the T. "He has proved himself an enemy of society, a subverter, ladies and gentlemen, of all order and stability, a conspirator against civilization itself. And for this reason I propose to dismiss him with the ignominy from the post he has held in this center. I propose forthwith to apply for his transference to a sub-center of the lowest order, and that his punishment may serve the best interests of society as far as possibly removed from any important center of population. In Iceland, he will have a small opportunity to lead others astray by his unfordly example." The director paused, then folding his arms, he turned impressively to Bernard. "Marks, can you show any reason why I should not now execute the judgment passed upon you?" "Yes, I can," Bernard answered in a very loud voice, somewhat taken aback, but still majestically. "Well, then show it," said the director. "Certainly, but it's in the passage, the hallway." "One moment." Bernard hurried to the door and threw it open. "Come in," he commanded, and the reason came in and showed itself. There was a gasp, a murmur of astonishment and horror. A young girl screamed, standing on a chair, and got a better view. Someone upset 2 test tubes full of spermatozoa, bloated, sagging, and among those firm, youthful bodies, those undistorted faces, a strange and terrifying monster of middle-agedness Linda advanced into the room, coquettishly smiling her broken and discolored smile, and rolling as she walked, with what was meant to be a voluptuous undulation, her enormous hunches. Bernard walked beside her. Well, there he is, he said, pointing at the director. Did you think I didn't recognize him? Linda asked indignantly, and then turning to the director. Of course I know you, Tomakin. I should have known you anywhere among 1,000. But perhaps you have forgotten me. Don't you remember? Don't you remember, Tomakin? You're Linda. She stood looking at him, her head on one side, still smiling, but with a smile that became progressively in face of the director's expression of petrified disgust, less and less self-confident, then waveredly and finally went out. Don't you remember, Tomakin? She repeated in a voice that trembled. Her eyes were anxious, agonized. The blotched and sagging face twisted grotesquely into the grimace of extreme grief. Tomakin! She held out her arms. Someone began to titter. What's the meaning? Began the director. What's the meaning of this monstrous... Tomakin! She ran forward, her blanket trailing behind her, threw her arms around his neck, hid her face in his chest. A howl of laughter went up irrespectfully. This monstrous practical joke, the director shouted. Red in the face, he tried to disengage himself from her embrace. Desperately, she clung. But I'm Linda! I'm Linda! The laughter drowned her voice. You made me have a baby! She screamed above the uproar, and there was a sudden and appalling hush. Eyes floated uncomfortably, not knowing where to look. The director went suddenly pale, stopped struggling, and stood, his hands on her wrists, staring down at her, horrified. Yes, a baby! And I was its mother! She flung the obscenity like a challenge into the outraged silence, and then suddenly breaking away from him, ashamed, covered her face with her hands, sobbing. It wasn't my fault, Tomakin, because I always did my drill, didn't I? Didn't I? Always. I don't know how. If you knew how awful, Tomakin. But he was a comfort to me all the time. Turning towards the door, John! She called. John! He came in at once, paused for a moment just inside the door. He looked around, and then soft on his moccasined feet strode quickly across the room, fell on his knees in front of the director, and said in a clear voice, My father! The word for father was not so much as obscene as its connotation of something at one at one remove from loathsomeness, and moral obliquity of childbearing, merely gross, a scatological rather than pornographic impropriety. The comically smutty word revealed what had become a quite intolerable tension. Laughter broke out, enormous, almost hysterical, peal after peal, as though it would never stop. My father! And it was the director. My father? Oh, Ford! Oh, Ford! Oh, this was really too good. The whooping and the roaring renewed themselves. My faces seemed on the point of disintegration. Tears were streaming. 6 more test tubes of spermatozoa were upset. My